Today's story, It Doesn't Matter How Many Times You Kill Us, originally appeared in print form in the anthology In the Eyes of the Hungry, edited by Valentina Rojas and Michael Tichy, and published by Castaigne Publishing.
Wonder-working power in the precious...
Incredible as they seem, are not the results of mass hysteria.
You may wish to adjust the dial you are currently tuned into.
The wrong station. When you're the kind of guys who get together to lynch a union organizer, you also tend to be the kind of guys who get together and play cards once in a while. The vigilantes had been 7. Roy Allen and D.K. Vermeer were the big shots, both lawyers for the copper company. But being a lawyer meant something different in a frontier town than it did back east. They were both tall, handsome men. They'd played college ball and gone to Cuba with Roosevelt. And there were the cops, Toomey and Duggan. Toomey, the chief of police, kinda clean-cut climber who, despite his soft accent, could be brought to dinner with shareholders and state senators. Duggan, just the opposite. A dirty, degenerate, drunken Mick. A rapist, it was said. And the department's chief detective. The kind of man you counted on for rotten jobs. And there was the company muscle, Billy Crookshank, small and wiry and smiling crooked at his cards, and... oh, it sounds unlikely. I swear it's the God's honest truth. A rusted hook in place of his left hand. There had been 2 other vigilantes that night at the railway trestle. One had been an old friend of Allen's, a Continental Agency detective named Baltimore, who'd since gone on to work a strike in Colorado. The 7th had been some kid, Durant, a driver for the limo company. He'd been at the black Cadillac's wheel as their punch-drunk victim drooled blood in the dark of the back seat. And now, as it turned out, young Durant was dead. "Found him washed up on the riverbank this morning." Duggan drank his whiskey like water, while the others sipped cautiously from their glasses. "Wait, is anything? Half the bones inside him broke. Was the fall that killed him, or the water?" Allen had an East Coast voice. Prep school, Mid-Atlantic. "Couldn't say, sir. But if I was a gambler, still the upright man I am, I say it was the murderer that killed him." Allen turned gray eyes to Duggan's boss with interest. "Is it true, Toomey? Do the police suspect foul play?" Toomey sighed and folded. Conservative with cards, money, and drink. "Well, Mr. Allen, there's young men you'd expect to wind up dead in a river. And then there's ones like young Durant. Clean cut. All American," D.K. Vermeer reminded them. "That's why we brought him, Roy. Our race. He tossed a few more chips on the pile. So you think this is related to that night?" "Well," said Toomey. "Of course it is." Vermeer. "It could be a coincidence, D.K.," said Allen. "There's no reason to jump to conclusions." "Of course there is." Vermeer's hand won, and he scooped chips while the others threw in their cards. Then how did they know Durant was involved? Whoever they are. Does it matter? I think so. "They probably tracked the car," said Crookshank, scratching his cheek with the hook. "Not too many black caddies in this town. Track the car, I could guess who was driving. Use a third degree to find out if you're right. That's what I'd have done. Very enlightening, Billy. Question is, Duggan was slurring as he poured himself another half-pint of liquor. Who's they? The Union, said Crookshank, plainly. Or it could be the IWW, said Allen, or the Bolshevists. Comes the same thing, doesn't it? Vermeer dealt a new hand. Whatever the case, said Toomey, studying his cards. You can rest assured, Mr. Allen, the police are looking into it. We'll find who's responsible. Well, until then, we should take precautions for our safety. If you're right, and it was foul play, then they'd have wrung our names out of Durant. Take precautions, said Crookshank. I thought we were the precautions. Smiling, he let his heavy hook clank to the table. The man they'd left hanging from that railway trestle was called Frank Holloway, and he was already half dead when he arrived in town. In fact, rumor was he'd died a couple times already. Back in Pennsylvania, he'd caught a bullet from private detectives, and it nearly stopped him. But he was a man for the cause, and there was a labor war in the West. So west he went. They hosed him down in a prison cell in Spokane in the winter, and he never fully recovered from the pneumonia. In Arizona, company thugs had drove him into the desert and left him there to die. He walked more than 80 hours in the heat before someone found him. In Fresno, they arrested him for speech and threw him in a black box 25 days straight. And in El Paso, vigilantes put a noose around his neck and threw him from a moving car. His leg shattered. But 2 weeks later, he popped up at a union hall in Missoula, Montana, preaching on the need for better wages and safer conditions. This time, when they arrested him, the police chief tied him to a chair and beat him bloody with the heavy brass key to his cell. One of the deputies kicked him so hard in the gut, it gave him a hernia. So maybe Frank Holloway was already dying when he arrived in that final town. And maybe he already thought of himself as dead. But he didn't stop. His only possessions in the world by then were the clothes on his back, a battered hat, and a red card stamped with the letters IWW on the back. On the first night, he spoke in support of the strike at the Union Hall. He called the president a lying tyrant, and the U.S. Army Uncle Sam's uniformed scabs. The second day, his landlady found a note for him pinned to the front door of the guest house, warning him for the first and last time. Get out of town. Holloway had smiled, crookedly, as he had since a police boot broke his jaw in Pennsylvania, and then he crumpled up the note, threw it away. On the third night, at 4 a.m., the seven came, whispering down the macadam in a black Cadillac. 6 had climbed out, dressed in black, and 1 stinking of whiskey. 50 seconds later, they'd kicked down his door to find him waiting quietly on the edge of the bed, fully dressed. DK had punched out a few of his teeth, and then Duggan and Crookshank had thrown him around the room till he couldn't stand. By then, everyone else in the guest house had been lying silently awake, listening to the sounds that they'd deny hearing in the morning, staring at the ceiling, hoping they weren't next. Before Crookshank could start in with his hook, Allen had kept the 7 on schedule with a curt command, and DK and Baltimore dragged Holloway down the hall, downstairs, kicked him through the front door, and forced him into the back seat of the car. The others had piled in after, laughing to each other, joking at Holloway as Durant drove them out to the edge of town. There, they climbed out, roped their victim to the rear fender, and dragged him down the pavement to the square and back. By then, he was basically dead. One of his kneecaps ripped off, and the skin all but torn from the front of his body. Christ, Durant had muttered as they climbed the trestle to string him up. Christ, he's still breathing. Well, they'd soon seen to that. At the blue-green hour before sunrise, when the workers were all trudging down to the mine shuttle, They'd found their erstwhile organizer spinning from the trestle, red with gore. Others take warning, read the sign stapled to his thigh. Traitors leave town. It was that same trestle, 1 week after the poker game, where Billy Crookshank's body was discovered, hanging limp, dry and broken as the summer grass, swinging slowly from his neck in the blue hour breeze. Well, he was pale as anything. His own hook buried in his forehead like a unicorn's horn. 2 down. The police beat up their usual suspects, but gained no leads. And Ed Duggan's drunken, violent suicide 2 weeks later stalled the investigation dead. Everyone had their own theory. Some people blamed the union. Others said the killers were turning on themselves. Some said, with a smile at first, but growing superstition, that Frank Holloway himself had hanged Billy Crookshank from that pole. To his discredit, Duggan had seemed to become obsessed with this theory in the days before his apparent suicide. He called Allen late at night, claiming to have seen Holloway himself in the lanes of Venus Alley after dark, always with that crooked smile, disappearing into shadow when his name was called. To Allen, with his feet up in the sunset of a 6th-floor office, these were just the ravings of a credulous Irish drunk. Someone had poisoned Duggan's mind. It was to be expected. The whole town was against them. Well, so what? They'd always been against the whole town. They were the mine's men, and the mine meant progress. And progress needed men who dragged the cattle by their throats. Allen, to be frank, didn't consider Duggan's death too much of a loss. But Toomey's. It was first thing in the morning, 2 weeks later, when the call awoke him. Mrs. Toomey on the other line, incomprehensible with tears, ran out into the teal lawn and slid into his car and drove across town. The body waiting for him in the dimness of the living room was stone dead, colorless, and perfectly upright. The bloodless fingers clawed, the white eyes staring wide. "Just a heart attack, Mrs. Toomey," he told her. "Probably never felt a thing." And though the coroner agreed, he didn't fucking believe it. And neither did anyone else. "Police chief slaughtered in commie reign of terror," screamed the town paper. "Holloway's killers get desserts," read the worker's rag. This subtle killing scared him more than Duggan's bloody death. Durant, Crookshank, Duggan, Toomey. 4 of the 7 dead by now. Christ. He hired 2 agency detectives as round-the-clock security on 12-hour shifts. DK had put up his nose and laughed at him, but Allen noticed his friend had started carrying around a loaded 6-gun. Allen went ahead and did the same. What neither of them considered was leaving town. The miners struck, encouraged by the police chief's death. Now was the worst time possible to leave. And besides, they thought so fiercely to themselves, this town was theirs. One night, not long after Toomey's death, a telegram came from Colorado. "Saw an old acquaintance down in Boulder last night. Watch yourself. Baltimore." Allen sent back asking for clarification, but only received silence. A creeping suspicion started to wriggle underneath his skin. That Baltimore hadn't sent the telegram at all. He didn't share his suspicions with DK. Cards were already a lot less fun with just the 2 of them sitting alone in terse silence, but the old friend still played from time to time. Not long after the telegram from Boulder, Allen arrived after dark on the broad white porch of DK's sprawling manse. The pillars were all lit up bright with electric bulbs. The copper wires, bloody red, which electrified America, had all been mined right here, in their mine, their town. Allen found the door unlocked. DK? Come on in! His friend's voice from upstairs. Alan waved off his agency shadow, who shrugged and sat himself in a chair just inside the door. Brought some beers, DK. Cold? Yeah, left them on the porch before I headed out. There's cold and there's Montana winter cold. Just put them on the card table. I'll be down in a minute. All right, I'll be in the washroom. He used the facilities, was just washing his hands, when he heard a loud tumble and crash. Hey, DK? Everything all right? But no answer came. And when he threw open the door, he found his friend, all 6'3" and 220, lying broken like a doll on the overturned wreckage of the card table. That's when the copper lights went out. He was instantly groping for the exit. "Fosse!" he shouted. "Fosse, get in here!" But the silhouette which appeared in the doorway did not belong to a heavy-set agency detective. It was the silhouette of a small, crooked man in a battered hat, 2 flat pinpoints of light reflected from the void of his backlit face. Eyeshine. No need for any of that, Roy. The voice was tired. Familiar. It's just you and me now. How about we sit? Cautious, Alan backed away from the silhouette and lowered himself onto the edge of one of DK's old upholstered hardwood chairs. Strangely, he recognized the voice from recordings, but not from the night at the trestle. That whole night they'd murdered him, Frank Holloway had never said a word. "So what are you, Frank?" Alan sat back, trying to casually position his body so he could reach for the gun hidden underneath his jacket. "Some kind of ghost?" "Nothing so easy, I'm afraid." The dead man removed his hat and entered the blue darkness of the living room, still limping, dragged over a chair so he could sit across from Alan. The ruined table and broken body of Vermeer lay between them. By the faint glow of streetlights filtered through the neighbor's yard, Alan could now make out the contours of Holloway's face, still crooked from that Pennsylvania boot, still scabbed and scarred with road burn, but healing, as well as that type of injury can. "Suppose you want some kind of explanation, Roy." "I'd love one, Frank." He wanted to keep Holloway talking as long as possible, so he could slowly shift his gun hand into position. "Suppose I'll indulge you. Ever hear of a copper mine called Thunderstrike?" Who hasn't? The name was bad luck. Most miners wouldn't speak it. One of the worst industrial disasters in U.S. history. A fire set off by a cave-in filled the tunnels with bad air and trapped 240 men below. Most died in minutes from asphyxiation. When they finally cleared the tunnels 12 days later, excavators found almost 90 who'd been trapped deep enough to die slow of thirst in an ocean of darkness, painting the walls with bloody fingertips. "I was there," said Frank. "At Thunderstrike?" "And the morgue, afterward. I was a kid then. A mucker, lowest of the low, scooping slag and loose ore. I know what a mucker is, Frank." "No, you don't." "Not really. Now, we had Chinese with us in that mine, and Irish, Finns and Balts, blacks and Mexicans, and Czechs and Serbs and Romanians down from Canada. We had all kinds down there. In the dark. You can't imagine it. So thick it felt like drowning. You'd think the depths would be cool at least, but all that rock just soaked up our body heat and started to cook us with it. The stifling air, the stink and groans of dying men, and the howls of those who'd been hit in the head so hard they turned to animals. And all in darkness. We were in hell, Roy. No exaggeration. It was hell. Alan's fingers were almost brushing the pistol grip. He needed more time, but it was all he could do to keep his contempt in check. Do you feel like getting to a point any time soon, Frank? I'm at it. You see, the worst thing about dying down there was the thirst. You ever truly been thirsty, Roy? I don't believe you have. Never even known the parched feeling of a day's hard work, have you? Since you've never done one. We were dying of thirst down there for days. No water, of course. The one thing we did have, Roy, is the one thing workers always have. Each other's blood. That's why our flag is red. It took a moment for Alan to understand what Holloway was saying. And then, even he, who'd been to war, who'd killed men with a bowie knife on San Juan Hill, even he flinched at the thought of crawling over dead men in the dark and chewing open their throats. For a moment, he could taste the stale, lukewarm blood. We got it out of them with teeth and fingernails, and it refreshed us better than the coldest champagne you ever drank at the governor's house. And you know what happened next? We all died anyway. Imagine sinking to that level, and then you still die anyway. He smiled and shook his head. Now, I don't know whose blood it was I drank that did this to me, or if it was just the act of drinking itself. Time came when I woke up in darkness and knew I was dead, because my heart was still, and yet I still thirsted after blood. I sat in the slowly cooling cavern with the rest of the dead for 2 days, until the rescue crew broke through and dragged us to the morgue. Well, after that, I started a new life, so to speak. Couldn't just go back to mucking out machines. There was a moment's silence between them. Cold Montana wind blew in the trees outside. Well, that's some story, Frank, said Alan. Tell me, did you ever think of killing yourself? Being both a monster and a red? Well, you'd think it'd be too much. Sure I did. But I had unfinished business, didn't I? I owed something to the men whose blood sustained me. Alan had his gun now. Its warm grip gave him confidence, and he finally let the full measure of disdain seep into his voice. And you think killing me is going to help them? How? Holloway laughed. I'm not going to kill you, Roy. You're damn right about that, thought Alan. I got a better revenge. The dead man leaned back in his chair, only his twin points of eyeshine reflecting in the gloom. I am going to destroy everything you believe in, Roy. I'm going to grind this world of yours to dust if it takes 1,000 years. When your descendants remember the man whose seed they sprang from, I'm going to make it so they feel sick. They're going to spit on your memory, Roy. And down in hell, you'll be so relieved you'll drink that spit like workers' blood. Roy Allen laughed. Well, you're wrong about one thing, Frank. What's that? Holloway's teeth glimmered in the shadow. Not staying dead. Then Allen stood, and the gun was blazing in his hand. But in its white flashes, Frank was in motion and laughing. Even as the bullets tore through him, he lifted Allen and flung him down across the body of his friend, breaking his back. Yet, even as the world went white, the gun was steady in Allen's hand. It fired itself, the window shattered, and Holloway was sprinting through the greenish light beneath the trees, laughing breathless as he left black trails of blood behind him in the snow. That night, and for weeks after, police combed the countryside, searching for the unnamed murderer of D.K. Vermeer and an agency detective. So much blood had been spilt inside that living room and on the snow outside the broken window, the coroner was sure no assailant could have survived. Well, maybe he hadn't. The whole rest of his life, Roy Allen never saw Frank Holloway again. The labor wars ended under the first of the DOJ, and in the carnage of the Western Front. The IWW was crushed, and the socialists were crushed, and the mine bled Montana's copper dry, and then moved on to find fresh veins to drink. From time to time, Allen thought about the dead man and shook his head and laughed. The war was over. Allen's side had won. 58 years later, when he was an old paraplegic living in a sprawling country house, a familiar face surprised him from the back pages of a news magazine one Sunday. That crooked smile, smashed out of shape by the boot of a Pennsylvania cop. He smiled a little to see that face after so long. He was leering from the background of a full-page spread on Chile. There were copper mines in that country, of course, owned by the same company he'd once lawyered for in a frontier town. The article was about disappearances. The Chilean president, a socialist, was dead. An apparent suicide, in custody after the coup. Now the American-backed junta was disappearing journalists and union leaders to make the country safe for copper mines and their shareholders. And there, in the midst of all that, Frank Holloway's photo, among the disappeared. "Well, well, Frank," said Allen to his empty house. "Looks like they've killed you once again." But then he stared at the photo for a while, and his smile faded slowly. "But who knows?" he murmured at last, touching his fingers to the page. "Maybe you'll get us next time round." The Wrong Station is made possible with the generous support of our listeners on Patreon. Join us today at patreon.com/The Wrong Station for bonus episodes, behind-the-scenes content, ad-free listening, and additional goodies celebrating our decade of dread. This week's episode, It Doesn't Matter How Many Times You Kill Us, was written by Alexander Saxton and performed by Anthony Botelho. Thank you, and it's going to take a few episodes to get through all of these, to Rachel, Janet Lunn, Zonk, Daniel Woods, Prodigal Frankenstein, Quinn Paliwoda, Taylor, Nikki Powell, Emily, Christina James, Lilith of the Clay, Hester, Gary Kita, Samuel Taylor, Tony Haas, Dan Dricken, Charlotte, Dustin, and Carmela Lamar for helping us keep the lights, well, off. The Wrong Station is co-produced by Alexander Saxton, Anthony Botelho, and Jacob Duarte Spiel, with music composed and performed by Alon Citrin, and arranged for the viola and performed by Viola Schmid. You can follow us on social media at The Wrong Station, or email us at thewrongstation@gmail.com. And until next time, thank you for listening.